I still remember when Avatar The Last Airbender first aired on TV in 2005. I was 7.5 years old at the time, and the flashy trailers before the first episode aired with the different kinds of bending were the coolest things I had ever seen. Then it was time. The first episode aired at 7:15 AM just before school started. And well, it is safe to say, I was blown away. From this point on, I woke up at 7 every day, watched an episode, discussed the episode with the boys at school, and repeat. It is undoubtedly one of the best series of my childhood, and the rest of the world shared this opinion. Avatar was a huge success. Just like any successful series ever created, Avatar got its own video game as well to capitalize on the success of the cartoon. Avatar The Last Airbender was released on October 10th, 2006, about 1.5 years after the first ever episode released. And yeah, I think this is the right time to explain the title of this video. Avatar The Last Airbender is the first of 3 Avatar games, 4 if you count the one Legend of Korra game. I actually bought The Last Airbender on release when I was 9 with all the money I had at the time, and just like many other fans of the cartoon, I ended up really enjoying the game start to finish. The professional game critics, however, were far from amused. Not just with this game, but with every single entry. Now, here we are, 14 years later, and I grew up to be the very thing I hated back then. Squidward. I mean those game critics. So why do I somewhat agree with these relatively harsh ratings now? Well, in order to explain myself, I decided it would be fun to cover all the games one by one to kind of figure out what went wrong here, starting with The Last Airbender today. Avatar The Last Airbender was released on a bunch of platforms, but as a kid I played it on PS2, so for this video I'll relive it on PS2 as well. After watching the crustiest introductory cutscene that's a carbon copy of the one seen in the series, trust me, this is 1920 by 1080, you're then shown a way better looking follow-up cutscene that actually looks like it was made for this game specifically. They briefly explain that you're at this waterbending village on the North Pole because Aang needs to master waterbending. After completing all the quests in this chapter, the Fire Nation attacks the village, and your goal is to stop the Fire Nation from taking over the world. A little later on in the game, these machines also appear that do the exact same thing as the Fire Nation, but near the end of the game you find out that these machines aren't related to the Fire Nation at all. They are enemies for a different reason. The whole game follows a pretty straightforward pattern after this. You enter an area, find out that the Fire Nation or the machines did something evil to this area, and you work your way through the chapter to fight the evil boss of the area. And that's pretty much all there is to the story. Now, while I wish the game stuck to the script of the cartoon, I can understand that this is very hard to do. The cartoon wasn't designed for the game, it's the other way around. And thus, even though you visit familiar places at times, most of the story doesn't align with the cartoon, and you do quests that never even happened in the cartoon itself. Now, while I don't think this is a problem at all, I do think that I could have come up with a better story here. Let's take this part for example. What you're looking at right now is the end of Area 3, aka the forest. After beating up a bunch of machines that were terrorizing the forest people, you then talk to this elder. This elder thanks you for informing him about the attack, says he doesn't know anything about the machines or where they went, and then tells you that there's a legend that says that there's some dude somewhere in the forest that watches over the forest and that this guy can help us. Even though nobody has seen this sage before, he then proceeds to tell you that some strange things have happened in the southeastern part of the forest without any explanation whatsoever, and of course that's where you'll encounter the sage. You then randomly fight an ancestral bear as a boss, after which it is revealed that it was just a sage disguised as a bear. He then proceeds to say some vague shit like,
"You possess the seed of knowledge already. Plant it at the core of the earth, and you will find what you seek."
And Aang just knows he's supposed to go to Amashu. Everything about this transition to the next area is just so lazy in terms of design and execution that It just makes me feel weird. If you're not gonna stick to the actual story, at least try to come up with something that makes sense. I don't think the story is terrible or ruins the game by any means, but I just feel like this is as low effort as it can really get. Now, despite feeling like the story was very uninspired, I did like the cutscenes they showed in them at the very least. The characters are all voiced by the same voice actors as the cartoon, and their excellent voice acting combined with the cutscenes that are jam-packed with humor, I just really liked watching those. For example, let's take the scene I just talked about. Even though I just talked about how I didn't like the Sage Bear story part, the cutscene that was attached to it got a genuine chuckle out of me. Even though that was partly due to the fact that the bear turning into a floating dude with a beard was the most random thing ever. To me, the cutscenes really make the story, and I truly think that this could have been an enjoyable storyline if they ironed out the nonsensical reasoning behind certain plot-related events. Now, as much as I'd want the story segment of this video to be longer, there simply isn't that much left to talk about. There aren't any insane plot twists, memorable events, or a real story left to talk about. You just fix the problems in an area, fight a boss, and move on to the next area until you beat the game. So yeah, I suppose it's time to just jump into the game then. Like I mentioned during the story segment, after watching the introductory cutscene, you start as Aang just outside of the waterbending village. He then talks about how Katara said she would go penguin sledding with him, and thus he needs to make his way up to the village as fast as possible. One thing you'll immediately notice here is that the game is played from an isometric perspective. I quite like this choice because it really works well for showing you breakable objects, enemies and dropped items, while still being close enough to not hinder the fighting aspect of things. The only thing that kind of annoyed me at times was the fact that I wasn't able to control the camera. It's just stuck in place, and sometimes I really wish that I could just adjust the camera a little bit to not have it stuck in a terrible angle. Anyways, as soon as you take about 3 steps and walk under this ice arch, the game then immediately starts explaining the fighting mechanics by having a wolf attack you. And justifyingly so, because fighting enemies is pretty much what this game is all about. To me, the design of Avatar: The Last Airbender would best be explained as a mishmash of successful RPG related ideas and concepts of other games all put together in a single game. They included things such as a level up system, health potions, crafting and equipment, all executed quite poorly in comparison to the successful RPGs they took the ideas from. To elaborate on this, I'll go over these aspects one by one, but first and foremost, I should mention that Aang isn't the only character that these things apply to. The game has up to 4 playable characters, which are all unlocked one by simply progressing through the game. First you unlock Sokka by preventing him from getting beat up by a bunch of firebenders, then you pay Katara's bailout, and last but not least, you are joined by Haru. Now you might be like, who the fuck is that guy? Haru is a young earthbender that makes an appearance in 2 whole episodes of the cartoon. He's a pretty forgettable character, but what other choice did the developers really have in terms of playable airbenders? Toph didn't exist at this point, so I didn't mind this decision at all. So basically, you get to control 3 out of the 4 elements and, well, a boomerang guy. Obviously, there's no playable firebender since they're supposed to be the evil force in this game. You can switch between these characters at any given time, but I ended up playing as Aang for pretty much the entire playthrough, for reasons I'll get back to at a later point in the video. Since there are 4 playable characters in this game, I don't think I have to explain that everything I'm about to talk about applies to all of them. But for the sake of having the shown footage make sense, I had to let y'all know that the availability of multiple characters was a thing. So, an RPG-like system copied from other games that they made the entire game revolve around, huh? What could possibly go wrong? Well, let's just start with the level up system. By defeating enemies and completing quests, you earn X amount of experience points. All members get the same amount, no matter which character you're playing with. Whenever you level up, one of 2 things happens depending on the level. You either learn a new special skill move, or one of those earlier learned skill moves gets a level up, making the attack stronger. these skill moves are actually really cool in my opinion. Every character has these skill move slots, each of them activated by pressing R1 and any of the square, triangle, circle or cross buttons. These skill moves can only be used sporadically since it uses up mana, in this game called chi, of whatever character you're using the skill move with. The variety and ideas behind these skill moves is actually pretty impressive. Not all of these are damaging moves, some of them have a different purpose as well. For example, Aang has R1 plus X, which makes him slap his stick on the ground in order to damage enemies, but he also has R1 plus square to create a tornado that confuses and stuns the enemy. I really like the different effects of the different skill moves per character. It really adds some depth to the combat system and it motivates the player to use moves strategically, rather than just spamming the same one over and over again. On the other hand, there's an argument to be made for the system favoring one character over another. Where Aang has these well-functioning combat-related moves, Sokka has dumb shit like throwing his boomerang for no damage or side effects whatsoever, and Katara's skill moves literally do nothing but heal herself or the squad. There is no reason for the player to ever switch characters because of this. Aang's skill moves are simply far superior. I like the idea of having variety and different moves for benders, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. One thing I do like, however, is the fact that you're allowed to choose which move you want to have activated. Like I said, by leveling up you either learn new moves or upgrade already existing moves. If you learn a new move while already having 4 active moves like in this clip, the default setting is that it will auto replace the move slot that the new move is meant for. In this case, I prefer to stick slap over the new move, and by simply changing the setting to manual in the menu, it only took me about 10 seconds to reverse the change. All in all, I have to say, although there are some kinks in the cable, I think overall this experience system turned out okay, and the flaws never really bothered me to a point where the game felt unenjoyable. Before continuing, I think it's for the better that I mention the monetary system first. Like I said, the developers pretty much copied all of the ideas implemented in this game, and adding a monetary system is one of them. The currency in this game is copper, just like in the cartoon. You can obtain copper by doing the exact same things you do in order to obtain experience, by beating enemies, completing quests, or opening chests. The only real difference between copper and experience is that copper isn't a 100% drop after doing any of these things. And copper can also be obtained by breaking random pots and boxes. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. This copper can then be used at shops that can be found in any of the quote-unquote towns of whatever area you're in order to buy items that I'll get to in a little bit. Other than that, it is more than logical that you can sell unnecessary items for copper too, so you can spend that money on things you actually need. Now, while I have a bit more to add to that, I think it's fitting to include that in the next topic I wanted to talk about. Aside from the experience skill move system, the developers also decided to include an equipment system for reasons unknown to mankind. This system is pretty much a carbon copy of equipment systems that are seen in games like Skyrim, and I think that's exactly why I actually kinda like it. Each character has a total of 6 equipment slots. 3 trinket slots for stuff such as rings and amulets, a helmet slot, a robe slot, and a boot slot. Why they only wear robes and apparently never wear pants is a question that I simply can't answer. Anyway, each character has their own equipment slots and thus they don't overlap, which means you can have 24 different pieces of equipment equipped at the same time. Each piece of equipment has different values for health, chi, armor, life, focus, agility, and strength. And while I don't even know if I ever felt a difference for like half of these, I really had a blast comparing different pieces of equipment to each other every time I obtained something new. There is just something satisfying about getting that +1 chi upgrade over whatever you had equipped before that, and I can't really explain why. Just like experience and copper, these different pieces of equipment are obtained by defeating enemies, completing quests, opening chests, etc. However, there is one thing you can do to obtain equipment that doesn't apply to both experience and copper. Every area has a couple of spots where you can pay a shopkeeper to craft equipment for you, after you have collected the different scraps of cloth and leather strips they need. I know, very original idea, once again. Anyway, while it was very easy to collect these items needed for crafting, since they're obtained the same way as every other thing I've covered so far, the dropped pieces of equipment were sufficient enough to never really feel the need to craft something. Besides, even after collecting all that stuff, the crafted equipment wasn't even better than what you were wearing half of the time. It's a good idea, but in the context of this game, it's just an unnecessary luxury. Not every piece of equipment has a different sprite. That simply would have been too much of a hassle for the developers. But I was already impressed enough by the fact that every piece of equipment has different stats, even if they have the exact same name and sprite. There is, however, a decently sized variety of pieces of equipment that actually do have their own name and sprite. These are quote-unquote special items that usually add more stats than the basic bitch ones, and they more often than not also add additional boosts. That's pretty much the final thing there is to this equipment system. Different helmets and robes can add stuff like faster health regeneration and chi regeneration on top of the stats they provide. Now, while it is more likely for special equipment to have these bonuses aren't exclusive to just the special equipment. Did I notice a difference between the various bonuses and various regeneration percentages? Of course not, but I do like the idea. To give you a little more assistance in combat, there are also these items to be found throughout the map, or bought from a shopkeeper. Unlike complicated games such as Nier Automata, which I reviewed in my last video, go watch it please, thank you. The items only go as far as chi and health regeneration potions. The other items you find are either parts you need for the earlier mentioned crafting, or items that are needed for a side quest of some sort. Like these leather strips for a new saddle for Appa. That's pretty much all the depth there is to the items. You either spend your money on buying or crafting equipment, the 2 available potions, and selling anything isn't really necessary in order to buy stuff you need from the shop, since there literally isn't much available. The only reason to sell anything is pretty much to free up inventory space when you have collected too many helmets or something. Now, while I don't think a game like Avatar should be centered around heavy item usage and incredibly difficult tactics, this system kind of nullifies the item system. I think a simplistic item system fits the game very well, but you can sell items for so much copper and find so much copper throughout the map that you'll never be short on copper to buy anything. The whole reason a monetary system exists is to save up and buy the upgrades you desperately need. But with the sheer amount of copper and the limited amount of items available, this just doesn't apply to this game at all. You simply always have the money to buy whatever you need. Now, while I do think all of these combat related aspects lack in one way or another, I'd say I was overly positive so far. In fact, none of these previously mentioned things bothered me at all while playing through this game. Then why is this video titled A Series of Missed Opportunities? Because none of this matters
at all.
This game has stolen all these RPG related elements from other games and applied them somewhat successfully, only for the enemies to suck absolute
Gorilla dick.
Throughout this game you fight enemies such as cats, platypus bears, bandits, Fire Nation soldiers, monkeys, wolves, and their designs are great, and I don't even mind the fact that they only have one available move based on their class that they just spam over and over again. That's perfectly fine. But why do these enemies have to be so goddamn easy? I can give this game to a toddler and they'd beat it without using a single health potion. At the start you don't have any special moves available yet and you're literally level 1, so the fights take a little longer, but they never become difficult. The more you progress through the game, the easier everything gets. Throughout the game I avoided 90% of the roaming enemies, and by the time I got to Omashu, which is chapter 4 out of 6 I believe, I one-shot KO'd these bandits with the smack your stick on the ground attack. Now, imagine if I did fight all the roaming enemies. I'd destroy them by even breathing in their direction. On top of that, even if you do get hit, these enemies do no damage at all. Their AI is the equivalent of a dead rat, and if you do get low on health, you can simply run away from the fight to regenerate health, because auto regeneration is a thing in this game. They literally did everything they could to make these fights as easy as possible and nullify the entire combat system that's in place. They also added the option to block in square and the option to sneak in circle, but the only way you ever use them is when the game is forcing you to, like in this library clip. Honestly, the best thing about these enemies is once again the stick slap attack. These weak ass enemies are everywhere and respawn every time you leave the area. Now, while you're able to run from them most of the time, sometimes they are extra annoying and just block your path. The stick slap attack blows them away and makes them roll over, so you can easily get past them instead of wasting time getting pointless experience. But words, what about the bosses? Surely they are better and more difficult, right? The bosses are just as much as a letdown as the regular enemies. While the designs and attacks look very cool, anything else of any boss fight is just whack. I have to give it to them, these bosses at least have more variety in their attacks, they usually have like 3 of them. But these bosses suffer from the same issues as the regular enemies. Their attacks do no damage, their AI is bad, and you do more than enough damage to take them down in no time. The worst part about these bosses is undoubtedly the way their attacks are scripted. Their attacks happen in waves and are always the exact same. You dodge the same pattern every time, they randomly pause and make it very obvious that it's time to hit them, and repeat. The only reason these bosses take longer than regular enemies is because you can only damage them during these painfully obvious downtimes, not because they're hard. All in all, the entire combat system isn't flawless, it's far from it, but it's implemented well enough to make it function in a game like this. To then mess up the enemies so fucking bad is just beyond me. It just gets rid of any difficulty this game has ever had. Had they made the enemies stronger and forced the player to actually make use of the features available, then this game wouldn't have felt as empty. Although, there's a case to be made for it still feeling as empty regardless. Which brings me to the quests this game has to offer. Like, I can't sugarcoat any of this, the quests are just really uninspired. Although it's pretty clear which quests are meant to advance the story and which quests are side quests, the objectives in both of these pretty much overlap. No matter what area you're in or what quest you're doing, you're always asked to do one of like 5 things. You need to beat some enemies somewhere, track down a lost person, find items so someone can craft something, find lost toys or flags, etc. While the main story quests sometimes do have a purpose, like exploring new areas or something, the side quests are, hey, go to this area, find this item, and bring it back. Like 90% of the time. The only real variation here is the singular Momo side quest that is present once per area. Once again, you need to find items, but they're scattered around the map, and they're usually pretty annoying to find. Now, while I like the fact that they're making use of Momo, these type of side quests are so annoying that I didn't even complete it once. There's no indication of where you're supposed to find these items, and even if you're almost right on top of them, the visual clues are more often than not so damn vague that you'll just walk past them. And then I haven't even mentioned the motion sickness when you're playing as Momo either. God, this was painful to look at for more than 2 minutes. The most noticeable side quest is probably the one that's attached to a fun game called 4 Nations. In this game, you have to attach the same elements to each other in order to either be the first to run out of pieces or make the opponent being unable to move any further. The game is super simplistic yet super fun. The AI isn't too bad, and the first 3 wins against any opponent give you some equipment as well. The fact that a simplistic game was the highlight though, says a whole lot. So yeah, the quests feel pretty uninspired and repetitive, the Momo feature doesn't really work, and to make things worse, there is no clear way of knowing what your destination is. When you accept a new quest, this green arrow appears on the minimap to show where you're supposed to go. While you're walking in a certain direction, however, this area logically moves around the minimap, and thus you likely want to check the main map to see if you're moving in the right direction. However, if you open the map, there's no destination or detailed view whatsoever. It just shows a large view of the area without any indication where your next destination is supposed to be. Sure, you can check what you're supposed to do in terms of quests in your journal, but that still doesn't give you a destination. Also, if you happen to accept a quest while you're already on a different quest, the marker simply resets to the new quest. Now, while you can still complete the old quest, you'll have to figure it out without the help of an arrow on the minimap. And we've already established that the main map doesn't do anything. As a result of this scuffed quest system, I ended up just accepting every quest I came across. And I either hoped to run into whatever I was supposed to do by accident, or simply not do it at all. What honestly felt more rewarding was finding one of the many hidden chests in every area, considering they give you a lot more items and money to work with than the main quests and side quests. These chests are hidden in random spots, and when you're close to one of them, a question mark will pop up above your head. Based on the location, one of the characters is then able to perform a quote-unquote focus move. This basically is a minigame where you press 4 or 5 buttons after each other, and then the chest opens. These focus moves are also used during different parts of the story, where you'll have to build the stairs with Haru or clear the air with Aang, for example. I've seen people complain that the sheer amount of focus moves in this game is too much and that these button minigames get annoying after a while, but I never really found myself getting bored of them. It sorta kept me awake. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to the main quests, side quests and anything else there is to do in this game. I feel like the developers could have released a much better game had they polished a few things here and there. Objectively speaking, this game just lacks in difficulty, storyline and in terms of things to do. Objectively speaking, it just isn't that great of a game. But you know what the message of this video really is? Objectivity doesn't mean shit. Because you know what? I really enjoyed playing this game. Even though I played it for like the 10th time in my life for this video. Yeah, the enemies are too easy and the quests are pretty basic, but just sitting down, relaxing and playing this game without being too much of a tryhard was such a fun experience. Yeah, the quests are boring, take too long to find and take a long ass time to travel to on foot, but every area you travel through looks amazing for PS2 standards. I mean, they even implemented things like snow and rain. Not to mention the fact that the basic music fits the game perfectly and makes it a blast to travel through different areas with different music. And while I do think the amount of enemies and the fact that they respawn is a little too much, bopping them with the stick slap attack never got old, and it made it pretty easy to simply move past them. I'm sure doing these repetitive quests and beating up the easiest enemies in the world gets boring after 15 hours, but this game only takes like 7 hours to beat if you don't go for 100% completion. I never found myself getting bored or not wanting to play anymore. In fact, while I was playing this game, time flew by and every time I quit playing I unknowingly played for like 2 hours, when it felt like 30 minutes. Is it because I'm nostalgic towards both the cartoon and the video game? Maybe, possibly, I don't know. But I do know that in my opinion, this game is worth your time. Objectively, it lacks in many aspects and I really understand why Metacritic professionals gave it such low grades. But subjectively, I can't say anything else than I really like playing this, okay? And I think that's where I'll leave it at. If you like this video, definitely leave a like rating. If you liked it even more, then definitely hit that subscribe button. I would highly suggest you play this game, even though objectively it might not be the best game ever. Personally, I really like it. And yeah, next up in the series, we'll be taking a look at another Avatar game, the follow-up game, Avatar: The Burning Earth. This game is the second game to ever be released in the Avatar franchise, and as a kid it was my favorite Avatar game out of the bunch. to see whether it still holds up today, 14 years after it released. We'll find out next time. I'm very excited to play this one. So yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna leave it at, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace! How do I defeat this guy? Jesus fuck, toilet paper tastes fucking nasty.